Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Wrench Tales. I'm with my really good buddy, Tomi Oliva from SJ Auto Solutions in Chicago, Illinois. How you doing, my friend?
I am Brett Will. And you, Mr. Brandon,
I,
sir?
that did not sound convincing to me.
I'm tired, right? I'm
I
tired.
hear you, but you should be, bro. I know how you work. You're a
Oh, yeah.
friggin' nutcase.
Yeah, I know,
But
man.
listen, in all seriousness, I really appreciate you taking the time to walk me through this awesome case study you have for us. And the reason I mention that is Tomi is an absolutely, he'll never admit this, but he is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I'll
When
never
it
admit
comes
that.
to when it comes to computers, when it comes to programming, when it comes to getting in at the board level, he is the guy to go to. Tomi has bailed me out and a few of my clients multiple times. So I'm extremely thankful and absolutely proud to know you, Tomi. So again,
Likewise, my dude.
I know how busy you are, and I appreciate you being with me today for this episode of Ranch Tales because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
But
oh
what do
yeah.
you got for us? We've got this 2016 and walks the walk, but it can't talk the talk, and we're dealing with a calm issue. But Tomi, if you wouldn't mind, do me a favor, walk me through what's going on here. You were called out to a shop. First of all, Tomi does a lot of things. Tomi has a standalone brick and mortar business in the city of Chicago. Um, he is a top notch computer. I guess I call you a rebuilder, right?
Some
What
repairer, most likely. More
repair?
as a better
Okay,
term, repairer, cloner, seller.
very good. Tomi good. Tomi does good stuff. You need an ECU? Call Tomi. But anyhow, besides that, Tomi does. He's got a mobile programming and automotive solutions provider business, and he was called in like many times before to a shop to handle um, an issue with a check engine light after a customer of his had replaced a transmission in this vehicle with a reman transmission. And it doesn't matter where the transmission was sourced. That's not the point. It's just that it was a reman transmission, and things aren't like they used to be. It's not as easy as it used to be to just go ahead and get a used engine or a used transmission or a used body control module or any node, any computer for that matter. There's underlying or overlaying, I should say, layers of complexity that exist now that have not in years past. And that's where someone with expertise like Tomi possesses really, really comes in handy. And it can be a game changer for your business as well. Tomi, again, I'll shut up, but can you walk me through this, please? This 2016?
Yeah, so this shop is actually not so much of a slouch shop. As a mobile programmer, I have different tiers of customers. I'll have some really good ones and some not so good ones. Some more knowledgeable than others. But this is one of my decent shops, and they called me actually to program this module. And I said, all right, yeah, I'll be there, And I got a call back and they're like, hey, Tommy, man, we don't need you. I said, oh, okay, no problem. I figured, they call somebody else or, whatever, it doesn't matter. And they're like, he made a note. He's like, hey, we pulled it out of our bay, we moved it to our parking spot, and the technician said that it was shifting just fine. So we drove it. I drove it myself, and he's like, "Yeah, it was fine." So we are like, we're just gonna punt it. I was like, "All right, not my problem." So about 3 or 4 days later, I get a call from him. Like, he's like, "Hey, man, we need your help diagnosing this thing. Um, if you recall, this is the one that you were supposed to come out and program, but we canceled. And you know, uh, we we ran a DTC, and my lead tech's a little baffled. But can you give us a hand?" And I'm like, yeah, sure. Just, I said, hey, I don't have time to come out to you, but why don't you just bring it by the shop and I'll gladly take a look at it for you. And yeah, we got it to the shop, and I was pretty confused at what I saw.
I mean, what was their complaint to you? The check engine light? I mean,
Just
what
check
was the
engine. It's a cell light.
That's it.
Yeah, just
Okay.
typically there's a check engine light that wasn't on before. They scanned it, and obviously they found some oxygen sensors disconnected. But what stood out was the P0 PU I'm sorry, U0101 code, lost communication with the transmission control module.
I understood. Okay. So at this point in time, I mean, I'm seeing something like this I mean, I've got my thoughts. Obviously, I'm not there, but if you're asking me over the phone or if somebody calls me with an issue like this, I'm going to try and communicate with the other computers on the network and see if I can talk to them. But if I got to the point where I couldn't talk to the trans control module, it's my assumption that something's missing, particular for that module. So if the communication network, if the telephone lines, for instance, are intact and the computer has available battery supply voltage and ignition supply voltage and healthy grounds and reference voltages, at that point, I would assume it's an internal computer fault.
Correct. I mean, and again, it's like, we don't know, right? At this point, we don't know if it's a faulty unit. We don't know if it's when they slam the transmission in, they pinch some comm wires or pop the fuse. I mean, the possibilities are endless, right?
For sure. See my share of that. That's for sure.
Oh, same. So, being since I already had the factory scan tool connected, I decided to run my vehicle code scan. So anytime I have a communication failure, at least for me, it's good practice to run a complete scan of the entire vehicle. And I'll tell you why. Typically because you can look at the entire vehicle. You can also, I call it tattletale codes, right? If we have
Hmm.
a bunch of modules saying, oh, there's a lost comm with the EBCM, well, 9 times out of 10, it's not a network issue. It's a particular issue with that module. Will you agree?
So, you know what? I want to stop you there for a moment, only because this is commonplace. This is really good common sense knowledge. But so many people don't realize all the little itty bitty bits of information that are available for us if we just take the time to look and think before we move. So many
Correct.
of us are conditioned to just, especially with the flat rate system, let's go, get moving. But if we stop and think for a moment and consider all the clues like Tommy's mentioning here, if we've got multiple DTCs from multiple modules and everybody's pointing towards the same suspect, it's a really good clue. It's a really good clue. So I appreciate you sharing that here. And
So,
Tommy, I zoomed in on this on purpose because you know when I was zoomed out here, it's very difficult to see. But I
mhm.
just wanted everybody to see what caught your eye here.
So when I started looking at it, I'm like, okay, um, I found it odd that the ECM was complaining that it couldn't talk to the TCM, but the TCM was actually on the network talking, and
I can see that right
and
here.
then the ECM just supposedly there's no communication, but the car runs and drives. So look, I don't like saying this too much, but it's just the truth. One of the reasons why I have a different diagnostic approach was because when I was, 650 pounds, it was impossible for me to crawl underneath a car or even, go underneath a dashboard. So I used to spend double, triple the amount of time poring over diagrams, researching the easiest way for me to get to my objective, right?
I love it.
Because it was so difficult for me to do it. Well, it kind of stuck with me. This diagnostic process stuck with me where I try to do the least amount of intensive work as possible when I'm chasing an electrical issue. Well, in this case, right, typically if you have a vehicle, have a module that's saying no comm with this module, what is it that exactly you're gonna do? What would you do, Brandon?
Well, as I was talking about earlier, if I've got a module that won't communicate, and I've got other nodes, other computers on the same, again, network, like a telephone party line, and everybody's saying, hey, I can't talk to this guy. And, I can't talk to this guy either. I'm going to focus my efforts, when I got to crawl under that dash, for instance, on that suspect node. And if that node has everything it needs to work, right? Just like you and I need food and water and rest to perform. If it's got voltage and ground reference and ignition feed and terminal integrity, right? Terminal tightness, and there's connectivity to that network, for all intents and purposes, the only thing left is to replace the computer itself.
Right.
And
Yeah. I mean, realistically speaking, right, when for communication, we need power, ground, serial enable if it's applicable, or a wake up signal, and our communication network. And in this case, a GM LAN, anybody who knows anything about GM LAN, it's daisy chain. Communication goes in and out of the TCM and then goes to the ECM, especially in this model vehicle. So what gives, right? I can talk to it.
mhm.
The car, we said the car starts, it runs, it drives perfectly fine. I drove it myself. No shifting concerns, nothing. It drives beautifully. So what gives?
I get that. And you know something? Again, I want to highlight the fact that Tommy is not
Mm,
crawling around this vehicle. He's not pulling panels off this car. He's not under the dash. He's not beneath the hood.
mm,
He's not back probing connectors. He's thinking. He's sitting still and he's using his head and he's chewing up the data that he has and he's making a preliminary diagnostic decision. And hey, listen, I was in the shop too, and I know what it's like to be under pressure, especially from your shop foreman or your team leader or your service advisor or worse yet, the service manager. When he or she looks up and sees everybody in the shop running around and they got grease on their eyebrow and they're sweating and there's impact guns going, that
Yep.
looks like productivity. But when you see Tommy standing around staring at a computer screen, it looks like he's not doing anything. But
Yep.
you have to, it takes it, believe me, I'm aware how difficult of a mindset it is to step away from what we know and to take our time and think, because in the end, that's where efficiency comes from. It doesn't come from running around like a chicken without a head. It doesn't come from the person who can run the fastest and who has the best physical stamina. It's the person who can think their way logically and avoid taking steps that are unnecessary. And that's what I love about your 650 pound approach, Tommy. By the
Yep.
way, congratulations on the weight loss, dude. You look great.
Gracias, man. I still
Yeah, I know.
I still got two Stecklers to go.
All right, so you've got your, I'll call it a preliminary step. You see you have DTCs, and you also see that your suspect control module, your trans control module. By the way, they were calling it a TECM. Totally, sorry, I'm thinking of TIPM. TECM, TECH, no, TEHCM.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Take them.
Transmission electronic hydraulic control module. What the heck does that mean?
It's just an internal. It's a GM and its infinite wisdom decided to turn the TCM transmission control module and the valve body assembly, like the valve block, as some people call it, or some trans guys call it, the solenoid pack, and turn it into one unit.
Gotcha. And you know something? I did know that, but I purposely wanted to bring it up because so many people don't even realize that it's become one. You want to get to that connector, sorry, you want to get to that computer, the transmission computer, you got to go inside the transmission and put on some gloves because you're going to get covered in trans fluid.
Yep.
But anyhow, where did you go from here, Tommy? Um,
So I took a peek into the TCM for codes, right? I said, all right, I at this point I just think that there's something that the ECM doesn't like about the TCM or the Techum. So I'm like, all right, let's go prodding around. Let's go look for some information. And I saw something I didn't like when I went into the Techum, when I went into the TCM and I looked at I was looking at my calibration files. I saw something that
those are these right here, right?
correct. Those are all GM's base calibration files. And and a little quick fact that I want to share with everybody. For
Yep.
those of you who don't know this, GM is pretty cheap when it comes to modules. PCMs, ECMs, EBCMs, they typically only like producing one or two hardware generations for a variety of vehicles, right? So what they do is they have one module and they use your flash file or your calibration files to perform different operations. For example, it'll turn off four injectors so you can use it on a four cylinder and as an eight cylinder, but you need to have obviously the correct flash file for it to operate. And this is pretty much the the same reasoning. Like the VIN number mismatched and the calibrations are off. So I suspect that this is my issue.
So do me a favor, only because I'm not in the know like you are. What are we looking at? So we clearly see there's a VIN number here, and obviously I know what that is.
Mhm.
Can you walk me through what these are and what they mean to you?
So for what they mean to me is every single GM separates the transmission calibrations into four different types.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the identifier alpha codes are, but I know that these numbers are every section inside the vehicle, the module's processing unit has a specific calibration that controls a certain function. It's better
Okay.
explained on the ECMs because there's always eight calibrations, eight mini calibrations that make one big flash file, if that makes sense,
Gotcha.
right? So in the Tecum, there's four of them, as you can see, module one, two, three, and four, right? So
Gotcha.
those
So
are,
these
and
are
then, uh-huh.
These are like instructions to carry
Correct,
out
yes.
certain.
So for example, like again, we can have a Tecum that's installed in a Yukon and in a two-wheel drive Silverado, like it'll be installed in a 1500 two-wheel drive Yukon versus a four-wheel drive Tahoe and vice versa. Obviously the shift patterns are going to be different. Towing capabilities are different depending on the vehicle. So this
Sure.
is how GM changes all those factors.
Gotcha. So it's almost like a baker baking a ton of cake, one vanilla cake a million times and putting different icing on
Yeah, in a
it.
nutshell.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. And you know something? Um, I didn't know that. I don't program. I don't do programming. I haven't since I've been at the dealership. And I know that's a totally different world than what you are facing on a daily basis. So I
Yep.
appreciate that.
Hmm.
So we get to where we're going here, and you see these identifiers. And what did you notice about these identifiers? What caught your eye?
The identifier is not necessarily anything. What I caught my eye
Okay.
was just a VIN number. It's not the same one as the vehicle.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So if I come back over here, the VIN number, this does
Yeah.
not what you this does
No,
not match.
no,
Okay,
it
so
did
this
not.
was included you. Gotcha. All right, that makes total sense. So some I also want to throw something else in here if you don't mind, Tomi. So many times you guys watch me do my videos with mastering diagnostics and the motor age is the trainer, and you see how many times I mention that we don't always need a factory scan tool. Many things we can accomplish, especially on the drivability side, can be handled on the global or sometimes we call generic side of the PCM using your basic professional automotive scan tool. But there is value in implementing a factory scan tool
Yep.
because the factory scan tool was designed to not only communicate with every node on that vehicle, but also every network that offers accessibility as well. And your aftermarket devices may or may not do that. So with that, there's certain functionality Tomi possesses here simply because he has the factory GM GDS2 scan tool. So sorry, Tomi. I just
No,
wanted to
yeah.
throw that.
So no, that's a great point, man. And I mean, can I find this information in like, let's say a scan tool as auto? Yes, it's in there. Like most of the scan tools, you'll find this information. What I like about this is that I pull it up in one report. I don't have to go back into my TCM, take a picture of the or a screenshot of the identifier or the engine night. I'm sorry, of the module identifier, and then go back into the ECM and then take another picture of that and then compare them. No, this is one printout, this is one sheet, and then I have all my configurations and all my codes and all my calibrations are all in one sheet. So I decided
Beautiful.
to run it, and of course, this is where that's when the picture hit me that hey, that Tecum has a VIN in it that doesn't belong. That's not the same as this vehicle.
I love it. Beautiful. So we are clearly seeing that, which one's this? This is our
So the vehicle identifier is always the top one. That's the one
okay.
that the GDS2 pulls from your vehicle. And for those who don't know, on GM, typically it will be the ECM
That's where
that
this
will,
info
that
is
was
housed.
correct.
Okay.
That's where GDS2 and SPS2 will pull your VIN from your ECM,
Gotcha. Very good.
typically speaking. There's some vehicles that pull it from a gateway like Chrysler, or some vehicles that pull it from multiple modules, like some Fords will do PCM, BCM, stuff like that. For example.
Gotcha. Very good. And again, we are seeing the mismatch. We've got a
Yeah.
783 finisher here versus
Yep.
a 508. So
Yeah.
great
And that's a
indication that something's wrong here. So right now, in your mind, you're like, okay, got it. I know what to do.
Well,
Are
no,
you there yet
I
or no?
don't, I don't, I don't know what to do, right? Because at this point, um, I'm a little confused because previous to this, the 6080 transmissions, if you put in a used module, for example, because at the end of the day, this is according to the shop, this was a remanufactured transmission, right? So, typically when I go to shops that have reman transmissions, they're supposed to be, you know, a new replacement Tecum. Well, obviously this wasn't, right? Are
Yeah.
we in agreement? This is
Oh yeah.
pretty much a used module at this point.
Mhm.
So
Totally understand.
I don't know if this is my problem, but I know it's a problem. Make sense? at this
Oh yeah,
point of my diagnostic process.
for sure. And again, Tommy, you're in the driver's seat, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, you're not digging into things. You're not dirty. You've been there several
Yeah.
minutes. And I love that. I love the research. I love being able to gather the data. My goal as I got older and more experienced is to work less,
Yeah.
be able to solve problems without running around like I used to when I was younger. And I never realized I was wasting time,
Correct.
but I was. And there's a million ways to skin a cat. And I'm not saying anybody who's watching this is doing things incorrectly. But there's always a better way.
You
And it's
know,
to have guys like Tommy come on here and show us
I'm gonna
some
give you an example that I got from when I started learning how to use a lab scope. I really don't remember who gave this to told me this, but it was really good advice. Um, if you using a at the end of the day, whether you use a meter, a power probe, a test light, or a lab scope, right? You're still gonna be able to fix the car. But having a lab scope compared to a meter is like saying, I can dig a ditch, but I have a shovel and you have a backhoe. So
beautiful. I love it.
it's pretty much the same thing. Yeah, you can fix a car just like I can. Who's gonna have an easier way of doing it?
Hmm. I use a similar analogy. I say fishing with a hook or a net,
Yeah.
but it's
Hmm.
basically the same message. And that's the point here. It's not that you can't fix the car or you can't figure out what's wrong with it with the tools you're using, but Tommy's leveraging the tool he has to its best advantage.
Yeah.
Um, so you realize they've installed this reman
Yeah.
transmission.
So I ended up calling him back. I'm like, listen, man, because at the end of the day, anybody who's mobile here knows that we get about 20, 30 calls a day, and it's all either half of them are help, the other half are, personal stuff. And it's just like, I don't know about you guys. I don't have the mental capacity to be remembering every conversation. So I'm like, hey, man, walk me through this thing. Oh, well, it's a parts store reman. They said we're supposed to program it, but it ran fine. So we just said it's not it. But the customer was complaining about the light, so she came back and we gave her a scan and we saw the oxygen sensor codes. Um, but we don't really care about that. We know we have to plug them back in. He said something about that. I don't recall. But that
Hmm.
wasn't my objective. My objective was the communication code. So I'm like, all right, this is what we know. There is a non GM remanufactured transmission in here that obviously has, either a reman Tecum that still has a calibration in it. So I decided, you know what, let me look this up. So I decided to go into all data and I plugged in the VIN number that was in GDS2 for the TCM, and it shows out of a 2020 Tahoe.
Uh-oh.
So that's a problem.
Yeah, that's not your car.
No.
Gotcha. Okay. So for for those who don't realize, as Tommy and I mentioned earlier, that this Tecum, um, again, transmission, electro, hydraulic control module. Basically, the name infers the logic, the electricity comes through here, right? Our
Mm-hmm.
control wires, our voltage, and our ground feeds, and our solenoid control. Our solenoid control is pretty much it's mated to the computer. Here's the solenoid body, right? That
Yep.
mates to a valve body, and there's not even wires here. There's nothing to touch. Everything is connected directly to the computer, and this computer is submerged in transmission fluid. It's
Mm-hmm.
wet. It sits in trans fluid. So this is basically where Tommy's and the shop's problem lays. It's internal to here.
Correct.
So walk me through this part, Tommy. Why I get what you're explaining to me. It doesn't have the same software in it. One's built for a truck and another one's built for an SUV, and they might have different towing capacities and such. And obviously the VINs don't match. But why are we getting communication codes? I don't I don't understand this.
I'm gonna explain this. That way there's more information to our public right now. So
Please.
everybody knows that every vehicle built after 2014 is on GM's Global A architecture. Global A architecture includes an environmental identifier and programming seed code for each individual module. Well, the Tecums are unique because they don't have either of these. identifiers in them. So you can slap used transmissions in any GM all day long, and sometimes they're fine, right? But sometimes they're not. Well, it doesn't prevent theft. Like if, say, for example, if I've installed a used ECM, a used BCM, even to a point a used cluster, or any of the five principal modules in Global A that have this unique identifier. If you install one of those used modules, the car typically does not start. Typically, especially if it's ECM, BCM, um, IPC at times. So it just really depends on the vehicle, but not to get too technical. Um, so yeah, so and then also when you're programming these used modules, GM will shoot out a error code and it won't program it because it sees that identifier doesn't match up with what the vehicle is supposed to have. Well, in the case of the Tecum, it's a little easier because again, if the calibration's close enough, the car will start, run, drive totally fine, no issues.
Again, no shifting concerns. All we're dealing with is basically this check engine light, right? There's no drivability symptoms.
Nope, nothing.
So how do we fix this? Like, what is GM's recommended fix? I mean, what would they
So
say at the
per
dealership?
GM service information, this module needs to be replaced. Per
Okay.
GM. And this is for all global A architecture. There's literature on not swapping used parts, even though like for the shop, this wasn't a used part. This was a reman transmission. But the
Right.
reality is the Tecum itself is used. It may
Mhm.
not they may have reconditioned it, but electronically speaking, there's still a VIN in it that came from a module from another vehicle. Right.
Yep. I'm with you.
So now I'm glad you highlighted this in red. This is no longer an issue today. Today GM will allow you to overwrite any VIN number mismatch on the 6080 and the 6090 transmissions. There are exceptions that I want to make aware here, because it doesn't pertain to this class. But if you guys run into any of the 6-speed front wheel drive based transmissions, 6L, 6040, 6030, 6070, though that family, like Traverse, like the front wheel drive SUVs, front wheel drive vehicles, if you see this type of code, you cannot flash it. If you flash it, then the transmission will go into limp mode. Why? I don't have an answer for that, but I know it's happened to me before. I've been burned plenty of times.
Gotcha.
But on the 6080 and the 6090, at this present time, you can go ahead and reflash it, and there's no issues. It will SPS2 will override it, and it's not a problem. But when
Good
I
to know.
did this case study, and I kept this case study because I feel like there's valuable diagnostic information here. When I did this case study, this was not a problem. When I tried flashing it, it failed. GM actually fixed its programming. So it pretty much, I suspect, again, I'm not a GM engineer. I can only speak on my own experiences from doing this. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've been able to basically flash over used 6080s and 6090s with no
Very
issues. Now, the front wheel drive ones, no, not yet.
understood. Okay. So understanding that we've got these options here, um, what is it you decided to do? Like, what do you know to be true, and what is your deciding factor or factors in your decision on where to proceed, how to
So
proceed?
I honestly, in this case, I typically, I would clone it since I have a lot of used module solution tooling. I would have just cloned it and then called it a day. The problem was that the shop, no longer had the original one. They gave it in as a core.
So you couldn't
No,
clone
there's
it.
nothing to,
And
there's nothing to
can
copy.
you can you please, obviously it sounds pretty self-explanatory, but can you define cloning, please, for
So basically we're making a per se a virtual copy of the software that's inside that module. We're
basically two
extracting all the
identical?
data. Yes, we're extracting all the data and we're making a copy of it and then installing it onto the reman transmission, for example. So we would have
Very.
taken that information from that module, and then I would have, uploaded into your reman Tecum, and it
Mhm.
would have been a one-to-one copy of the original.
Understood. But you can't do that because they got.
No, correct. They turned it in as a core.
Gotcha. Okay. So what do you do now then? You tell them to put a new unit in?
Well, I gave them their options. Obviously, they needed to contact the parts store where they got it, and you know, a little bit of back and forth. It wasn't as easy, but basically, we just thought it was just better just to get a brand new AC Delco unit. It was going to be faster.
Gotcha. So they got a new one, and you had to program it.
Correct. Yes.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah.
So after programming it, I mean,
Hmm.
you were good to go then?
Yeah. I programmed the tech in. I did an all scan, and that was it.
Everything good. And how do you know it's good? Like, what do you do? I mean, because there was no symptoms other than the check engine light. Is there a fear that the light would come back on? Like, how do you know the car's fixed? How do you hand the keys back to your client and say, I'm done?
Well, now the again, this was a hard fault. It would not go away. And now that I did my scan and I saw that my VINs are now matching,
See
um,
that here. So
the
this is for
check
the
engine
trans controller,
correct.
and here's the engine controller. Gotcha.
So now my cell light immediately went off.
Understood. Very good.
Mhm.
And this is just zooming in a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, but this is what you had before, right?
Correct. Yes. 7783
Gotcha.
5508 now.
So this is your actual
Mm.
vehicle, but this is the VIN that was in the Reman
Reman.
trans that they just put in. Okay, so
Right.
yeah, clearly you've got it rectified. That's got to be a good feeling now.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. No, no, go ahead.
So can you walk us through just briefly what you and I discussed over the last hour? I mean, what is the takeaway? If
Mm.
if we were taking notes, if you told everybody watching something to take away back to the shop with them, something they could
Mm.
learn from this, what would you
The
mention
number
to them?
the number one thing that I want people to learn is that there's always different ways of there's always a different way to diagnose something, right? Like there's
Hmm.
this is especially now where we're evident that there's going to be a lot more part shortages and there's going to be a lot of these vehicles already now are most common used vehicles. Somebody's going to buy a used vehicle at one point, and I just don't want people wasting their time if they have all the clues, right? Because a lot of people that I'll ask this question like, "Oh, if you have a communication code, what do you think?" "Oh, it powers grounds communication." Right? Well,
Yeah,
now we know that there's depending on the vehicle, there can be potentially a different diagnostic process involved. And it's a good practice to make sure you're actually, if you can actually tell yourself, yes, there's a no communication with this module. Like take an extra few minutes, go through them, scan them, talk to them yourself, and make sure that you can actually talk to it or not.
because in this case, your hands were tied only because the original, I'll say the original, the one that came out of the, yeah, I guess it would be the original node was missing. But had it not been there, you had the know-how, the tooling, and the capability to reflash it and just correct whatever issue was there, right? But
Correct.
simply
Yes.
because they had gotten rid of that, you couldn't do it. But here's my
Mhm.
biggest takeaway, Tommy, and that I learned
Mhm.
from you is a no communication issue doesn't mean that the computer itself isn't communicating.
Exactly.
This is and that is huge for me because as you said, Tom, um, my diagnostic approach, no communication with that node, but every node on that network still communicates. It directs me right to that node and any connectivity at it. Well, if I verify connectivity, right, my terminals are tight. I've got battery voltage, I've got ground, I've got reference, I've got communication. In all intents and purposes, it needs a node, but that might fix the problem, but maybe that node's $1,500 in a reflash to fix that might be, I don't know what your pricing is, but probably not $1,500, you know?
Correct.
It's
Well,
really
and it's also about understanding the failure. But real quickly, I would like to discuss something. Do you mind going back, Brandon?
not at
So,
all.
just in case you guys see this or this shows up at your shop as a, oh, we just bought this truck for cheap, but it has this problem. There's a couple different things. 6090, 80 and 90 Techums, they shouldn't be swapped. Their hardware generations are different. Um, Now I will say this, there's other uh little quirks that happens when you have a used Tecum installed, and they are, the ATF temperature doesn't report to the cluster because there's some models that it doesn't have to report temperature to the ATF temperature to the cluster. Some of them that I've run into are actually they're so different that they go into limp mode and they stay in limp mode. There are some that give you, like right now, for example, there are no communication code. And this is something to look out for. If you ever have a especially Silverado Sierra, they now require a sequential programming event when you replace the Tecum. Sequential means that it wants to see the same or updated calibration file in the ECM to match the new one that's going in the Tecum. So,
Uh-huh.
so I had an ECM that I was programming. When I was programming, I kept failing the Tecum. When I went back into the Tecum to look, it was because it had a different VIN in it. So that's something to be aware of as well. So I just, just little tidbits that I learned over the years of programming.
I appreciate that, man, and your expertise. Again, someone like me, I'm right up there, or I should say, I'm right there down there with the people that have never programmed before. I'm a step above that. I haven't programmed in years, and it was at the factory level, so I didn't have to worry about any of these quirks that you run into.
Yeah.
I had factory support behind me. If something didn't work out, I get on the phone and they fix it for me. But before we cut out of here, Tommy, anything you just want to throw in there?
So for those of you who ask why the communication codes, right? I don't know. But my biggest theory is when GM did the building of these files and they build the hardware, they also program the codes, right? Or they say they program in code setting criteria, like, oh, what's going to cause this code, what causes this code, what causes this code. Well, if you look at GM service information, it specifically says do not install use modules. So my theory is the ECM just doesn't know that it's a used module. It just knows that something's wrong. Like for example, the used module speaking French and the ECM is speaking English. So they're not on the same wavelength. So the ECM, the best code that it can throw out at you is loss of communication. Because technically speaking, it can't communicate because they don't speak the same language. That's the best description that I have for this particular error.
You know what that kind of reminds me of, Tommy? Almost like when you get a P0700. You just know there's a transmission problem, but you don't know what the transmission problem is.
Yes, a tattletale code. Similar.
Right.
Yeah, it knows something's wrong. It just can't tell you what's wrong.
I love it. Very good. Well, listen, I want to say that I really, really appreciate you, buddy. And I'm very thankful that you took the time to spend with us because again, the fear many shops, many technicians have about programming is situations just like this that occur sometimes right after programming or involved in replacing computers and stuff. But when we get somebody that can explain to us at a level we can understand, it takes away that fear and anxiety, and it gives us a level of understanding that will support us, our growth as technicians in the field. So, man, thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. Listen, everybody, thanks again for joining us on this episode of Wrench Tales. Again, my good buddy, Tomi Oliva of SJ Auto Solutions in Chicago, Illinois. I'm Brandon Steckler, Tech Editor Motor Age Magazine, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Thanks and take care.